Hi Internet! Welcome to the Gredtroyan YouTube channel. To celebrate the release of Final Fantasy XVI, I decided to release 16 videos ranking the Final Fantasy games in a variety of categories. Each game has their strengths and weaknesses, so I thought it would be a fun way to compare and contrast the games. These lists are just my personal opinion, trying to balance objectivity and personal preference, and likely failing to satisfy anybody. So, if you disagree with my ranking, which you probably do, let me know your ranking of the subject in the comments below. In this video, I'm going to be ranking the Final Fantasy games based on how fun they are as video games. I know, shocking. Ranking video games based on how much fun they are to play. What an innovative concept. It's actually a bit different for a series like Final Fantasy where story takes a priority for a lot of players, so a game that might be more traditionally quote-unquote fun might rate much higher on this list than said game might on my overall favorites list. As a reminder, this is for the main series games and tactics only. For this ranking, I will allow the MMO expansion packs and DLC to factor into my rankings, but only ever so slightly. With all of that out of the way, let's get into the rankings. Number 16, Final Fantasy XII. Final Fantasy XII is a game I generally found to be boring and tedious compared to the rest of the series. The early game environments are really bland, starting you off on the wrong foot for an extended period of playtime. As I got further into the game, I found that there were interesting locations to explore, but it takes a long time to get there. The combat isn't particularly satisfying and the story is on the weaker side, not allowing you for much momentum to keep moving forward through the monotonous gameplay loop. Final Fantasy XII feels more dry, serious, and western than any other mainline game. While it does have some of the vibrancy and camp of the series, like going around and shouting your Captain Bosch von Ronsenberg of Dalmasca, it's weighed down by too much bland feeling content in between. There was only one single battle in the entire game where I actually felt myself enjoying the combat mechanics. It's not all bad. The license board is really fun, and I do like the Gambit system a lot, but I think the Gambit system would be even better in a more action-oriented game. The entire point of the Gambit system is so you don't need to micromanage your AI companions during combat, and we've all complained about Down and Goofy in Kingdom Hearts. So introducing Gambits into a game like that, and you've got the best of both worlds, great strategy and great combat mechanics. I don't hate Final Fantasy XII, but I like it less than everything else on this list. Number 15, Final Fantasy I. Final Fantasy I really struggles with momentum to keep me interested in the game. There's not much to the game other than explore towns, explore dungeons, and fight. The story is paper thin, and the environments are generally less interesting to explore than future installments, so there's not much pushing you to keep playing. It's just the core gameplay loop of the series without anything on top, like a dry burger with no toppings, but it's also a burger from the 1980s and tastes kinda stale. However, when attempting to speedrun the game, I actually found it really enjoyable. Plowing through a Final Fantasy game in around 5 hours of game time felt like a fun new twist on the series for me, as I'm not a speedrunner at all. I like to take my time and soak in the world and story, but one's world isn't that interesting and neither is its story. But zooming through the game as fast as I possibly could brought a new layer of enjoyment to the game I'd never realized was there, and I really loved the experience. Again, I'm not a speedrunner, so that 5 hours isn't too impressive for a lot of folks, but for my first time actually beating Final Fantasy I felt pretty good about it. I'm not one of those guys who really likes playing the same game over and over again, messing around with different job combinations to see how the feel of the game changes, which is basically the core appeal of Final Fantasy I, but even for those kind of mechanics, there are so many other games that explore those kind of ideas better. All in all, I had fun with Final Fantasy I, but there are other games in the series I'd much rather play than it. Number 14, Final Fantasy XIV. Final Fantasy XIV is one of my favorite Final Fantasy games to just hang out in. It's nice to log in, go to a cool location, and just kinda chill. There are some wonderful locations and great environments to explore in 14. I always enjoy the limited time seasonal and special events. There are plenty of fun minigames at the Gold Saucer to keep you occupied, and there's so many little elements of charm and fun intertwined into the game. I like the NPC in the Gold Saucer who talks about how great it feels to take a dip in the fountain, and when you do it blasts you high up in the air. Stuff like that is really great. But there's a lot of stuff I really don't like about 14. First off, I really hate the UI. I find it to be a cluttered mess and not very intuitive. Even after customization, I've still never been satisfied with the look. I really don't like waiting in queues to do mandatory story content. I've got a fairly busy schedule, and so waiting for 20 minutes to progress the story is super frustrating as a guy who mainly plays single-player games and likes to control the pace of my progress. At those points, my progress is completely out of my control, and I'm never like, yay, I get to wait to play the game now. I also had a really bad experience with the final boss of A Realm Reborn. It was my first time doing the raid, and I didn't fully understand the mechanics, so I got left pretty far behind. I ended up missing the first stage of the boss battle because I couldn't proceed, and when we got to the next stage of the boss, I wiped immediately and waited for the other players to kill the boss. Then I got to watch the ending. Roll credits. How satisfying. What's more, I don't like feeling rushed when viewing cutscenes and dungeons because of the pressure of keeping pace with other players who just want their level bonuses. That's not to say the community of 14 isn't great. Everybody is super kind, courteous, and respectful. It's also really fun to explore player design content like the housing districts. The good nature of the community, great music, and general appeal of the world help the game a lot. But there are a lot of things I flat out just don't like about 14, and they're core to the experience of the game. One final thing I want to say before I move on is a direct address to the folks who say that you need to play through 40 plus hours of A Realm Reborn before the game starts to get good. I've noticed a lot of you are also the same folks who say playing through 20 hours of 13 before the game gets good is an unreasonable ask. I personally find both games fun, and we'll get to 13 when we get to it, but it's important to acknowledge that it's a definite flaw in 14's design that you can play for over 40 hours before you get to the quote-unquote good parts. Again, I don't dislike 14. I actually like it quite a bit, but I think it's important to truthfully acknowledge the game's flaws. Number 13, Final Fantasy II. I actually find Final Fantasy II to be a really fun video game to play. I know that's a controversial statement these days, but honestly, I like the absurdly broken leveling system. I like making all of my characters god tier with a couple hours of grinding while listening to a podcast, and then breezing through the rest of the game, and being fully able to enjoy the story and set pieces. The story has great momentum, unlike Final Fantasy I, so I'm never bored with anything I'm experiencing. It's a lot of fun traversing the world of Final Fantasy II, despite how bleak the setting is, because the places you visit are genuinely interesting and feel like part of a rich, interconnected world. In addition, I absolutely love the bonus content added in the remakes of the game. The extra content in the Soul of Rebirth post-game is brutal, but I ultimately found it really rewarding due to its story significance. The game has its flaws, like its stupidly high encounter rate, which is the main reason why this game doesn't rate any higher. But Final Fantasy II also didn't bring me to any of the low lows of the previous entries on this list. It's a fun, old-school JRPG. Number 12, Final Fantasy V. Final Fantasy V is well known as one of those Final Fantasy games with a weaker story but really fun and engaging gameplay mechanics. While I think the job system in 5 is a lot of fun, I find it to be a little overrated in terms of the heap and praise it gets. The game pretty much places all of its eggs in the job system basket, which does add some fun dynamics to battles and progression, but the battles themselves are pretty standard JRPG fare and nothing too exciting. The game has some fun locations to explore, like the Magic Library and the Ship Graveyard, but I found most of the locales to be on the more generic and forgettable side. However, there's a lot of charm in the game, like the village full of Moogles, and a sheep with a bad attitude that decides to kick you over a fence, so the offbeat humor definitely adds to the fun factor. Still, it's not quite enough for me to rank the game any higher than the number 12 spot. Number 11, Final Fantasy III. You're probably wondering why I think Final Fantasy III is more fun than Final Fantasy V, since 5 clearly has a better job system and better battle mechanics. I feel that point is pretty inarguable, and I'll concede that point. Both 3 and 5 are incredibly similar in terms of mechanics, with 5 offering more polish, so for me, it all comes down to the environments you explore. I found the gimmick dungeons and general world of 3 to be more interesting to traverse than 5's. I liked the mini dungeon, and as brutal as the Crystal Tower was, it was pretty epic. While nothing in 3 is as interesting as the highest highs of 5's world, the rest of it is more consistently engaging. 3 even has a lot of offbeat humor like 5. The games are very similar, as I mentioned previously, and 5 does have some nice quality of life improvements. But I think the grander sense of exploration, coupled with more interesting individual vignettes throughout the story, ultimately made 3 a more fun experience for me as a player. When I first played 5 and 3, I had the reverse opinion, and like most folks, I ranked 5 above 3. But after reflection, I really do think I had more fun with 3. It just vibed with me better. Number 10, Final Fantasy VI. Let me get this out of the way first. Controlling a small army of Moogles might be the single most fun moment I've ever had in any Final Fantasy game. Period. I cannot express how much joy that segment gave me. For me, that's the absolute peak of 6 as a video game, and nothing else in the game even comes close to that moment. Which is a bummer because it comes so early in the game, and nothing else can touch the highs of that majestic battle. Beyond that, there's a lot to love in this game. Controlling Magitech armor at the beginning of the game is really, really fun. Edgar using a chainsaw and wearing a hockey mask is goofy, silly, and a ton of fun. Sab and suplex in a train is fantastic. Locke stealing clothes from enemies as a gameplay mechanic to continue the story is hilarious and brings a giant smile to my face. Anything in the game involving Ultros is comedic gold and makes me burst at the seams with laughter. 6 is full of a lot of fun content I find endlessly enjoyable. But there's a lot of stuff in 6 I'm not as hot on. I don't find Terra a compelling character in the slightest, and given how much of the story focuses on her, well, that really drags down the fun factor for me. I also don't like the World of Ruin. It's a momentum killer every single time I play the game, and I find myself becoming bored immediately upon leaving the island. There's a lot of stuff in 6 that leaves me feeling meh, but I can't deny the high highs that this game reaches. Number 9, Final Fantasy XI. I have no idea why Final Fantasy XI is as fun to play as it is. It's a bit hard to define what makes this game so special, but I'll try my best. For starters, the UI for the game is much cleaner than the absolute nightmarish mess of 14. That's honestly a big plus for the game. I love how organized everything is in the menu systems. Gameplay-wise, it also feels more like a traditional Final Fantasy game than 14 and 12, with its constant menu usage and combat. The zones are absolutely massive and a lot of fun to explore. I main Red Mage, so I get a kick out of casting Sneak and Invisible on myself to jaunt past enemies as I make my way to my destination. It's something I find incredibly appealing. It's a lot of fun unlocking new trusts, which are NPC summons you can use as party allies. I like gathering characters you meet through playing the story and seeing their different abilities as they aid you on your various quests. I like making different party combinations of different trusts. I also like being able to beat the final boss of 11's base game in under 2 minutes because I reached Matt's level and was able to stomp him. There's a certain joy that 11 brings out in me that's really special. I was not expecting to fall in love with 11, but I did. However, there are a lot of things that are really frustrating about 11. It's by far the hardest game in the main series without question, and that level of difficulty can become very annoying very quickly. There are a lot of forced waits like in 14, but they're even more egregious in 11. There's an in-game clock for in-game days, with each in-game day being a little under an hour. There are times where you need to wait until the next game day to proceed with a quest line, which isn't bad if it's 11 PM Vanadil time and you just have to wait a couple minutes, but it can be a bit annoying otherwise. However, the game does have waits based around real-world days that refresh at midnight in Japan, so you might find yourself having to wait an entire real-life day to proceed with playing the game. It's also a very grindy game, and not all of that grind is satisfying. Allow me to offer an example of the tedium 11 can offer. As part of the recent Voracious Resurgence questline, you need to enter a special dungeon called Sortie. You can only enter this dungeon once per real-life day, and you have a 1-hour time limit in the dungeon. Your goal is to complete objectives in there to collect a special kind of currency only available in said dungeon in order to proceed with the main story. Depending on how skilled of a player you are, it can take days or even weeks of grinding through the same dungeon once a day in order to get the required items to proceed with the story. You could beat an entire short RPG in the time it takes you to grind through the Sortie content. Oh, and on top of all that, there's a queue to get in, so if you try going into Sortie during busier times of day, you might end up waiting 30 minutes just to gain entry. 11 has a lot of systems similar to this, and it's worth mentioning because they are definitely problems. It's an old school MMO, which means heavy grind and intense difficulty, which really isn't my thing. But as frustrating as some of the grind is, the core gameplay is really fun. The battles are dynamic and fast-paced, the world is a lot of fun to explore, and there's never a shortage of things to do in 11. If you're dealing with a forced wait, chances are there's something else you can do on your checklist in the meantime. 11 goes a little overboard with some of its systems, but in the end, it's super fun to play even if I'm just logging in to plant some crops in my Mog garden or do some battling for a few minutes. It's a great time. Number 8, Final Fantasy XIII. Final Fantasy XIII is a fantastic game. Honestly, the only part of the game that really annoys me is the Crystarium. I think it doesn't have enough branching paths to be worth it, and that the design should have been more streamlined and automated. But otherwise, I'm pretty happy with the rest of the game overall. The environments are absolutely gorgeous. Yeah, they're extremely linear, but you know what? I don't mind. I'm enjoying the eye candy, and I don't need to wander off a branching pathway to get a couple more treasure chests when I'm soaking up some of the greatest scenery and music ever produced in the JRPG genre. I can handle a few less branching paths, and I'm fine with the trade-off. Plot has a lot of momentum, so I'm never bored with the story, and I'm always excited to play through the next area. The core of the game is the battle system, and it's fantastic. It's one of those games where you just want to pick up and play for a few minutes and do a few battles because the combat is so fun. A lot of games in the series have combat where you're just getting through it to enjoy the story, but you wouldn't just pick up the game to do random battles for 15 minutes after you've already beaten the game. 13 is a game where you get the urge to just plop down and play a few battles because they're so engaging and fun. Is the game a bit linear? Yes. Is the level progression system tedious? You bet. 13 definitely has some problems, but it also excels in a lot of ways that it isn't given credit for, and it's a blast to play. Number 7, Final Fantasy Tactics. The core of Final Fantasy Tactics is the battle system. There's almost no exploration to speak of, so in terms of gameplay, it's all about character progression and big, epic battles. Right off the bat, the out-of-battle menu game is way better than 13's. The job system in Tactics is the best in the series, and it's so much fun customizing your characters as you progress through the game. My personal favorite customized character is a gun-wielding Black Mage. It's so fun making all these weird combinations and playing epic games of chess against the computer. The battles in this game are so incredibly fun, and like 13, this is the kind of game that's fun to just turn on and play a random battle or two. Beyond that, the side content in this game is actually pretty damn good, even with the lack of exploration. There are plenty of unlockable characters and side quests, and pretty much all of the optional content is extremely fun to play. There's a lot of optional content in the Final Fantasy games that is, quite frankly, terrible, and not fun in the slightest. But basically every piece of side content in Final Fantasy Tactics is pure joy to go through and experience. I'm a big fan of Final Fantasy Tactics and think it's one of the most fun games in the series. Number 6, Final Fantasy XV. Final Fantasy XV, like Final Fantasy XIV, is one of the most fun games in the series to just hang out in. It's nice to drive around and enjoy the sights, take some pictures, go fishing out on the open ocean, and maybe ride a chocobo around. 15 really captures a road trip vacation vibe extremely well and makes you feel like you're taking a holiday in the Final Fantasy world, and that's a really good feeling. The combat is simple but fun. Warp striking, however, might be one of the most satisfying things to do in any Final Fantasy game, in or out of battle. It's so cool and feels awesome to do. It's incredibly satisfying from both a visual perspective and a gameplay perspective. Warping to high areas and getting a critical hit on an enemy using a warp strike, it's a chef's kiss in terms of having fun playing a video game. Final Fantasy XV isn't perfect. While I enjoy any side quest involving a cat person, cup noodle, or crossover with a Sakaguchi-developed mobile game, most of the side quests lack depth and are pretty lame. A good chunk of the world feels really empty. And while I didn't hate Chapter 13, yeah, it goes on a little long. The game also feels incomplete, even with all of the DLC, and that does leave a cloud lingering over the game, and not the kind of cloud you want in a Final Fantasy. Overall though, 15 is really enjoyable to play, and is one of those games that's easy to plop on for a few minutes just soaking in the game's world. Also, side note, Episode Arden is ridiculously fun. Number 5, Final Fantasy X. Final Fantasy X has some atrocious minigames that are infamous for frustrating players to no end. Those minigames are also mostly optional, and if you're like me, you skip them and have a ton of fun with the good stuff in 10. And the good stuff in 10 is really, really, really good. First off, the battles. The combat is so incredibly satisfying in this game. Being able to switch out characters on the fly, control summons, and flexibility with limit break usage is all worthy of the coveted chef's kiss. Mwah! The sphere grid is super fun to play around with, and one of the most enjoyable leveling systems in any JRPG. And you know what? I like Blitzball. The minigame has a divisive opinion in the fanbase, but I find it to be hella fun. And let me tell you, one of the most satisfying moments for me in any Final Fantasy game came from my last playthrough of 10, where the Besaid Oryx beat the Luca Goers in triple overtime to win the championship. I jumped from my seat and cheered like my team had just won the World Cup. But I'm American, so I don't care about soccer. So I guess the Super Bowl? Except I don't like football, so the NBA championship. Because basketball is pretty cool, just like Blitzball. Aside from the joy of battles in Blitzball, Spira is generally just really fun to explore with a good balance between towns and dungeons. The Cloister of Trials puzzles are actually a fun change of pace. And again, while a lot of the side content might suck, you don't have to avoid 100 lightning bolts and do whatever that chocobo is doing with balloons. Most of the stuff the game actually forces you to engage with is really fun. I have a great time whenever I play Final Fantasy X, so it ranks high on my personal list. Number 4, Final Fantasy IX. Final Fantasy IX is a game that just oozes with fun. The charming world feels inviting and is a treat to explore. The locales are filled with personality and so are the locals. The characters are so likable that it's fun just walking around as them, be it Zidana's confident swagger, Vivi's stumbling cuteness, or Steiner's hilarious awkwardness. The card game Tetramaster is plenty fun, and I really don't get the hate this game receives. I actually like it better than a more famous Final Fantasy card game, and love challenging random characters to card duels in 9. A lot of folks didn't like that you were forced into doing the card game as part of the main story, but since I enjoyed the game and have been playing Tetramaster throughout, I never had any issue with it. I also really liked the Mognet system of delivering letters to different Moogles, and enjoyed the side quest. The main minigame, Chocobo Hot and Cold, is fun, but I do think it takes a little too long to reap the rewards from playing the game. However, beating Fat Chocobo in a game of cards and having your Chocobo slide down a water slide is pretty great. In terms of more traditional gameplay mechanics, I do find the gear system to actually be a fun way to grind. Deciding which piece of gear to equip in order to learn or use certain abilities is something that continually keeps the equipment system interesting, making 9 have some of the most fun menu gaming in the series. Overall, 9 captures a great sense of charm and adventure throughout its design choices, which makes it one of my favorite games in the series from a pure fun perspective. Number 3, Final Fantasy IV. Final Fantasy IV might not have expansive minigames or tons of side content in comparison to other titles, but what Final Fantasy IV does well is nail the core gameplay loop of Final Fantasy games. It's all about story, exploring dungeons, engaging battles, interesting towns, and repeat. Final Fantasy IV nails all of these. The environments are incredibly well designed. The dungeons have interesting gimmicks with plenty of branching paths and treasures to find without becoming overlong and staying past their welcome. The game boasts an impressive 3 world maps, and each of them is a joy to traverse. The constantly changing party consistently keeps the battle mechanics engaging and interesting. The encounters feel perfectly balanced because the designers know exactly who you have in your party and when, allowing for each part of the game to be tailored to very specific design experiences. There are plenty of clever battles, like the Mist Dragon, the Dark Elf, the Demon Wall, and the 4 Fiends. There's also fun side content like the Sylph Cave and Land of Summons. Final Fantasy IV is pure joy and shows that even the most traditional of Final Fantasy gameplay can be top-notch. It's brilliant execution of a classic formula. Number 2, Final Fantasy VII. Final Fantasy VII is an incredibly fun video game. First off, the materia system is creative, addictive, and fun. It's exciting to level up your materia and come up with crazy combinations to push the limits of the system. Speaking of limits, limit breaks are awesome. They're flashy, cool, super satisfying to use in battle, and it's also super satisfying to unlock new ones. And speaking of flashy, man are the summons in this game really cool. I'm a simple man. I like when I summon Bahamut Zero and he does this cool laser from space. It makes me smile. And Knights of the Round. Knights of the freaking round, baby. 7 is loaded to the brim with tons of minigames, and honestly, I really like them. There's snowboarding, motorcycle riding, racing chocobos, breeding Moogles, doing squats. Why is doing squats fun in this game? I love it. I absolutely love it. The game even has a submarine, which is a nice little throwback to 3, but the underwater map in 7 is way more fun to explore. 7 also has some great super bosses. There are plenty of games in the series with super bosses, but 7s have a special appeal to me because of how specifically absurd the strategies to beat them are. I also like how the game has optional characters but limits the number to 2. The less is more approach works well because each of those hidden characters have nice little side quests and subplots that make them feel like an important part of this world, but the fact you go out of your way for it makes the experience feel like an extra treat. I like that the game has hidden optional cutscenes but doesn't overdo it. It's just the right amount. The environments in 7 are incredible. I love the pre-rendered backgrounds and think that they look stunning. For my money, Midgar might be the most immersive area ever in a video game. Cosmo Canyon is majestic. Costa del Sol is relaxing and chill. And the Gold Saucer, man, it really feels like I'm hanging out at a theme park when I go there, and I love that. 7 is a game with a good balance of charm. There's light and darkness, happiness and sadness, yin and yang, and 7 balances these perfectly in a way that makes for an incredibly fun video game experience. Number 1, Final Fantasy VIII. Purely as a video game, there's nothing more fun in the series than Final Fantasy VIII. Using the junction system to break the game and turn your characters into gods early in Disc 1 is such an absolute joy. Oh, you hate grinding? Good. There's less grinding in Final Fantasy VIII than in any other Final Fantasy game. Oh no, you need to grind for an hour, then you defeat Diabolos and turn off random encounters. Congrats! The game is now a boss rush with no grinding. And you know what? An FF game that's just a boss rush with no random battles is actually super fun. You can just leisurely enjoy the environment you explore and completely demolish your enemies with your overpowered characters. The enemies in this game level with the player, but you only get EXP from random battles, not bosses. So, with Diabolos turning off random battles for you, you're essentially an invincible god plowing through Final Fantasy VIII. It's so much fun. The main story isn't the big appeal of Final Fantasy VIII. No, the big appeal is the side content. If you decide to play a lot of Triple Triad, you can essentially hijack the plot and turn the game into a card anime. Congratulations, you're now playing a Yu-Gi-Oh! JRPG. The side quests are so much fun. I love racing to fight Odin under the time limit. I love exploring the undersea research facility and uncovering its secrets. I love battling Tonberries and forcing the King Tonberry to appear. I love the goofy fight against the Jumbo Cactuar, and I think it's actually hilarious that he'll run away if you damage him too much but don't land a killing blow, because that boss fight takes a long time. It's a hilarious troll on the player to do such a thing, and I respect a hilarious troll like that. And if all of that wasn't enough, you've got great visuals, great music, a main character wearing a rock and roll leather jacket, and the coolest final dungeon in the series. A lot of the story of Final Fantasy VIII is cringe, but the cringe actually makes the game even more fun. It might not be the greatest story in the series, but as a video game, it's easily the most fun in the series for me and takes the #1 spot as having the best fun factor of any Final Fantasy game. Thanks for watching this video. Again, these lists are my personal opinion, and I'm definitely curious to see you guys posting your rankings in the comments below. Be sure to do the YouTube things, the liking, the subscribing, etc. And if you like this video, don't forget to check out the other rankings in the series. Thanks for watching, and I hope you find peace and happiness in your life. Cheers!